Have you ever kept a journal? And did anyone ever read it without your permission?
Another year, another birthday that was not marked on anyone's calendar except mine, and while my mother angled her body toward the front porch like a game show hostess, and my father held his phone up to capture the big reveal, my brother Luke jangled the keys with that cocky little wrist flick he learned in high school, and the red bow on the hood shone like a stop sign telling me to quit hoping for basic decency. So I did the only sensible thing left, which was breathe in through my nose. Taste the sugar of the store-bought cupcakes I had picked up for myself on the way over, just in case. And memorize the shape of their smiles, so I would know what it looked like when people celebrated an adult child for simply existing while pretending another adult child had vanished into the wallpaper. I heard my name exactly once, not as a greeting and not as a happy birthday, but as a reminder to please step out of the frame because Mom wanted a clean shot of the hood ornament, and in that moment the absurdity was so complete it became almost funny. The kind of humor that is dry as a saltine and goes down sideways, because here we were, a family standing on a driveway we had resurfaced one blistering July with my labor, and my dad's rented machine and Luke's sudden back pain, and the only person invisible today was the person who knew where the hose bib leaks, who called the city when the curb sank 2 winters ago, who remembered to bring paper towels to every barbecue, because Mom still thinks napkins are a conspiracy by the big tissue people. I am not proud of the way I used to fight for crumbs, the breathless little speeches I would rehearse during my commute about fairness and respect, and how it costs nothing to look someone you love in the eye and say you matter. Because those speeches always collapsed when the coffee table got crowded with someone else's celebration, and I would wind up holding a paper plate and nodding along and pretending my throat wasn't tight. So this year I tried something new and radical and, to my surprise, instantly relieving, which was to become quiet, not sulking or theatrical, just professionally silent the way a nurse gets when the patient needs the room still enough to hear the heartbeat that does not want to be heard. Luke revved the engine like a teenager, even though he is closer to 40 than 20. Dad hooped about horsepower. Mom crowed about, finally, something reliable. And the salesman who had delivered the car for the bow photo op kept glancing at me like he wanted to offer me a brochure for emotional warranties. So I helped him by signing the delivery slip as a witness, full name, neat cursive, today's date spelled out. Then I took one of my cupcakes, peeled the liner with slow care, stuck a wooden skewer where a candle might go, and bit into it while smiling in the exact way my mother smiles at every camera, a wide polished crescent that is unmistakably our family's, and the salesman, bless him, whispered, "Is it your birthday?" And I said, "Apparently not," which made him look at the bow and then at me, and then down at his shoes like he had just stepped on the ghost of a boundary. The thing about choosing silence as a strategy is that people think silence is nothing, when actually silence is a room you just locked from the inside, and every second it stays locked, someone on the other side remembers something they were hoping to forget. I finished my cupcake, wiped my hands, slid my phone from my pocket, and without commentary posted a single photo to my feed, one cupcake on a paper plate, the wooden skewer standing there like a flagpole on a small sugary moon, and my caption read, "Celebrating the little things," which is harmless enough unless you are my Aunt Debbie who sees everything, connects everything, and thinks subtlety is a crime against justice. Debbie's comment arrived before I even reached the sidewalk. "Wait, is today your day, honey?" And then a chain of cousins chimed in with those sweet, sloppy blessings that sound like gravy poured over a dry piece of meat. And while that chorus gathered steam, I walked past the hedges and the hostas I planted with a trowel and a sunburned nose. The summer mom decided hostas were too basic, only to declare them elegant the moment her neighbor praised them, and I put my hand on the gate. Noticed the latch I had oiled last month so it would not screech, and remembered that I had months ago in a round of pre-holiday cleanup, been added as an admin on the family group chat because everyone else kept muting it and missing the neighborhood alerts and the weather warnings and the plumber appointment reminders that somehow always ended up in my lap. Revenge, when you expect it to taste fiery, sometimes arrives cool and crisp like water from a clean glass, and all I did was very gently step out of the party without announcing an exit. Walk the long block to my car with the dignity of someone who does not need witnesses, sit behind my own steering wheel that has never worn a bow, and, with the same steady fingers I once used to braid my hair before recitals no one attended. I opened the group chat labeled Family Updates, changed the photo. From a collage of Luke's baseball highlights to my cupcake on a paper plate, updated the description to birthdays, weather warnings, and anything we should remember for people we love. And then pinned my post so that every single time Mom or Dad or Luke opened that chat to coordinate their shiny errands, the first thing they would see would be the thing they chose not to see in person, which is me, still here. Still inconveniently having a life that deserves a calendar square. I did not type a word, did not send a lecture, did not even add a party hat sticker because I am not 12, and yet within minutes the read receipts stacked up like little blue confessions, and the typing bubbles pulsed and vanished, as if the three of them were taking turns writing and erasing the apology they could not find a way to make real. And, while the bubbles performed their nervous dance, I rolled down my window, let the air touch my face, and laughed softly because, for once, I had not begged to be seen, I had simply placed a mirror where they would have to look. By the time I turned the key and the radio found a song from the year I left for college with a duffel bag and a stubborn streak, my phone began to shake with incoming calls from Mom and Dad, and then from an unknown number that turned out to be the dealership's finance office asking for a document my parents had obviously misplaced. Which made me wonder what exactly had been signed and in whose name, and whether the celebration on that driveway had been as clean as the photo suggested, and when. I let all of it go to voicemail and pulled away from the curb. The chat pinged again with a single message from Dad: "Call me right now, it's urgent," and I kept my eyes on the road because the thing about silence is that once you learn how to hold it, other people start hearing everything they were sure they could bury. The urgent text from my father sat there like a flashing hazard light I refused to acknowledge, because the moment you sprint toward someone else's emergency you teach them that your time is elastic and your backbone is decorative. So I drove home with the window cracked and let the old song finish, parked under the maple that drops those spinning seeds like tiny helicopters every spring, and decided that if silence had worked for one measured hour on that driveway, then it deserved a full day. To stretch its legs, which meant no returning calls, no soothing messages, no cleanup duty for paperwork I had not signed and celebrations I had not been invited to participate in. Just the ordinary rhythm of my life executed with a precision that would look, to anyone watching, like indifference, and to me felt like the first sane breath after years of performing as my family's unpaid stagehand. The group chat, newly crowned with my cupcake, did what group chats do when someone rearranges the furniture and refuses to explain the new floor plan. It burped up strings of half-thought apologies and sticky jokes. Then a series of practical questions disguised as olive branches. Did I have the garage code for Aunt Debbie's place because her keypad was acting weird? Could I confirm the date for the block party permit? Had anyone called the city about the storm drain filter? Each one a relic. From the long era when I was the reliable switchboard they dialed without thinking, and for the first time in years, I let those lines go cold. Because sometimes the kindest thing you can do for people who forget your birthday is allow them to learn how their lives operate without you lubricating every stuck hinge. I ate leftover stir-fry, answered a friend's text about meeting up for trivia, and, to give myself something to do with the energy I used to waste on composing dignified replies that would not move a single molecule in my parents' universe, I opened the shared calendar that I had built during one weary winter after Dad missed a court date for a speeding ticket and blamed the post office, and I performed the smallest, pettiest, most satisfying administrative miracle I have ever done, which was to create a recurring all-day event labeled My Birthday, set it to repeat every single year on this exact date, marked it as high importance in a cheerful color my mother cannot ignore. Invited the usual suspects plus the orbit of cousins who pretend they never saw anything, and then, because I am not a monster and prefer documentation to drama, I attached a photo of the cupcake alongside a scanned image of my birth certificate, the corner notched by the county clerk's stamp and my baby. Footprints marching across in charcoal, and I wrote exactly 6 words in the description, so we do not forget again, after which I closed the laptop, slid it under the couch cushion, and let the notification ricochet across the county like a polite earthquake. Within minutes, the calendar app lit up like a Christmas parade, replies stacking like a chorus line of guilt and defensiveness, Mom sending a breezy, "Oh my goodness, of course, silly us," Dad adding a thumbs up I declined to interpret, Luke dropping a shrugging sticker that made me understand how grown men remain adolescent without effort, while the cousins split into those who sent private messages, "Are you okay? Do you want to come by?" I always loved those hostess and those who replied all with aggressive cheer about making next year extra special, as if the point of a forgotten day is to promise a balloon later, and while their digital manners performed a wobbly apology tour, I set my phone face down and went out to the porch where my neighbor's old cat, a stubborn calico who chooses me only when I am busy, made a throne of my lap and settled there like a verdict. By nightfall, the acoustic cover band at the bar 2 blocks away had murdered 3 classics and revived a 4th. My trivia team had placed second because I misremembered a city nickname, and I had posted exactly one photo that was not designed to provoke anything except my own happiness, me and a basket of sleepy shelter puppies from the afternoon volunteer shift I had signed up for on impulse. Their ears folded like paper fans while one of them chewed the drawstring on my hoodie, yet even that harmless bit of sweetness worked like a mirror shoved under someone's chin, because Mom commented with a brittle, "Wish you'd come to dinner," and Aunt Debbie swooped in with hard-to-attend dinner she was not invited to. And the cousins who usually lurk came roaring into the light with principled speeches about fairness and family, and suddenly the performance in that driveway had a new audience that was not willing to clap on command. The dealer's finance office called again and left a second voicemail about verifying an address on file and matching signatures, which told me 2 important things. First, that my parents had probably reused my email for some paperwork because I am the only one who can fill out a web form without summoning a teenager, and second, that their urgent concern was not my vanished presence, but a logistical knot they assumed I would untie with the same competent fingers I have used to fix their router, their thermostat, and their kitchen sink sprayer. So I poured tea, listened to their message once, and marked it as unheard, because if they want a grown man to receive a grown present, perhaps grown people should handle grown details, and if they cannot, perhaps grown people should sit for a minute in the discomfort of realizing the invisible daughter was also the quiet engine that kept their little bus from rolling into a ditch. It was close to 10 when the night took on a different pitch, the kind that makes you sit up and measure the distance to every door, because the porch light triggered, footsteps sounded on the walkway, and my mother's silhouette, precise as a cutout against the glass, appeared with a grocery bag in her arms and that determined jaw she reserves for talking to customer service or referees, and although every childish part of me wanted to flip the deadbolt and make her ring until the neighbors came out with lawn chairs, I opened the door and let her in, mainly because I wanted to see whether she would bring the old script or a new one, and whether her bag contained fruit, apologies, or another errand for me to run. She set the bag on my kitchen counter like an offering, half a rotisserie chicken, a tub of potato salad, a lopsided cake from the discount rack, and a new planner with flowers on the cover, and she launched into that fast, bright tone she uses when she is terrified and pretending she is busy, calling me dramatic and sensitive in the same breath she used to describe how crazy the day had been, and how there had been so many moving pieces, and how she had assumed we would celebrate this weekend, while I watched the timeline of my life flicker behind her words like a slide projector clicking through years of assumed, and when she finally inhaled I said, carefully, that I was not angry at the car, I was tired of the pattern. And I wanted proof that they understood the pattern without me mapping it for them like a crossing guard for adults, and she blinked because the planner on the counter had become a joke she had written accidentally. Then her phone buzzed and she blanched. At whatever message had arrived, and without sitting or touching the cake knife she said, "Your father needs you to unlock the insurance portal right now. They will not add the vehicle without the account holder." And she looked at me with a mixture of dread and entitlement that told me my name was still pinned to the center of their functional board like a thumbtack, and I felt the kind of calm that arrives when a test shows its questions in advance, because I had changed nothing. I had only stopped compensating, and even that small change had rearranged the furniture in their heads so thoroughly that they could not locate the door without me, which is why I smiled, handed her a fork, told her the cake looked crooked but edible, and said we could discuss accounts after we ate, since the calendar now showed my birthday in a color no one could ignore, and when she straightened, offended and desperate, the porch light clicked again and a car door slammed at the curb, and my father's voice, closer than it should have been at this hour, called my name in a tone that sounded less like authority and more like someone who has finally realized the spare key they counted on may not be under the doormat anymore. My father came in without waiting for an invitation, which is a habit he would call efficiency and I would call convenience dressed up like leadership, and he stood just inside the doorway with that stiff posture he uses when he wants to look like the adult in the room. Except tonight the effect was ruined by the small desperate glance he threw at the kitchen counter where the crooked cake sat like a shopping cart that won't wheel straight, and while my mother started her performance about how the dealership had automatically connected the vehicle to our existing policy and how anyone with an email address could get tangled up in digital nonsense these days, he cut to the chase and said they needed me to log in, confirm the vehicle, and do that paperwork thing you do, because the insurance would not finalize the addition without verification from the account holder, which, as even he managed to say without choking on it, was me. I did not raise my voice or moralize, because I have learned that a calm woman is more terrifying than a furious one, so I pulled the laptop from the couch, slid into the chair, and logged in the way people who read the instructions log in. And the portal opened with that bland corporate cheerfulness that always looks like it is apologizing for existing, showing me 3 familiar tabs: policy, drivers, billing, and a new 4th tab labeled pending changes, which unfolded into a tidy summary that, in any other circumstance, would have been forgettable, yet tonight announced itself like a subpoena, because the new sedan had been added as a vehicle garaged at my address, the primary driver listed as household adult, pending confirmation, and the billing method set to my saved card for continuity, which is the kind of word companies use when they are trying to make theft sound like customer service, and I felt my mouth shape a humorless smile when I saw that whoever had entered the request had indeed used my email, which meant all notifications, penalties, and nice little auto-renewals would be bouncing to me like obedient rubber balls while my brother revved his way to the grocery store for victory popsicles. When I asked, without punctuation or sugar, in whose head it was a good idea to anchor a gift to my record and my card, my mother's hands flew to the planner like she could hide behind flowers, and she talked about family bundles and discounts and how we always do this together, which might have been true if together meant I plan it, I pay it, I fix it, and they treat the whole operation as a household appliance that never requires gratitude, while my father cleared his throat with that practiced judicial sound he likes and said that, historically speaking, I have always managed the logistics because I am good at it and Luke is busy, which is a sentence so artfully insulting it should be taught in seminars, and I realized that, left unchecked, they would stroll through this portal the way they have strolled through my patience for years, so I drew a little digital line on the floor and invited them to step back. I scrolled to the driver assignment page, a tidy grid of names and checkboxes, and I read out loud the section that explains, in polite underwriter language, that misrepresenting a primary driver or garaging address constitutes a material misstatement, which could void coverage in the event of a claim, and I asked if anyone would like to volunteer a reason the car should be rated at my zip code when it would sleep every night outside their Cape Cod with the peeling shutters, and my father muttered that everyone does it, my mother whispered that the agent suggested it for now, and I could feel the old muscle memory of caving begin to flex. The reflex that says it is easier to tidy up after other people's shortcuts than it is to hold a boundary and let the consequences ring like a bell. So I told that muscle to sit down and, with a steadiness that surprised me, I changed the garaging address to theirs, set the primary driver as Luke with his full legal name spelled correctly, toggled the required affidavit checkbox, and added a note that all drivers would need to upload current license scans by the end of the week, because nothing teaches adults to read fine print like being asked to find a scanner. They both protested at once, a two-part harmony of inconvenience and injured pride, but I kept going, because the portal offered me a small petty mercy wrapped in pure policy, a field labeled driver status, with a drop-down that included, among other options, excluded, and while I would not sabotage coverage or do anything that would put lives at risk, I also understood that an excluded driver designation is a well-known tool for managing premiums when a driver will not be operating a particular vehicle, and it is reversible, traceable, and absolutely above board, so I did not click it. I only hovered my cursor long enough for the tooltip to explain implications. Then I looked at my father and said, "Since we are talking about honesty and continuity, perhaps we can put something equally tidy in writing on the family side, a one-page agreement that acknowledges today, that commits to actual birthdays, that promises not to use my credit or my name to pad a celebration without my consent, and that schedules a simple dinner on Sunday in my honor, with the people who made me and the people who claim me. And if we can manage those basic gestures of respect, I will proceed tonight with the final verification and enable the automatic payment again, because I am generous and tired, and as susceptible to roast chicken as the next human with a beating heart." My mother called the idea transactional like that was a slur. My father said families do not need contracts. I said families who forget need calendars and families who borrow need receipts. And I reached into the grocery bag, broke off a piece of chicken skin, and passed the fork to my mother, because all revolutions require blood sugar. Then I opened a blank document and started typing the plainest paragraph of my life, a simple record of the day, and a list of promises that would fit on one page without adjectives, and while I wrote, my phone vibrated against the table with an incoming call from an unknown number that I let roll to voicemail, and then a text from Aunt Debbie that simply read, "I am parked 2 houses down. Blink twice if you need an air horn," which made me snort and keep typing, because even if the cavalry is one sarcastic aunt in a minivan, knowing she exists makes the night feel less tilted. When the agreement was printed and slid across the table like a restaurant check, my father's hand hovered as if the ink might stain him. My mother pretended to read while skipping the line about not using my accounts, and Luke, who had apparently been outside this whole time revving a different argument into the phone with someone named Amber, walked in mid-sentence, glanced at the paper, laughed the easy laugh of a man who will never pay retail as long as women with spines keep failing him out, and said there was no need to be dramatic because the finance guy had already said we could push the verification, at which point I clicked to the billing tab, disabled the saved card, toggled the alert that sends policy notices by postal mail to the policyholder's address, scheduled an identity verification call for Sunday at 6, and watched my parents realize that the silent daughter does not have to shout to rearrange a room. She only has to touch the right switch with a steady hand. And that was the moment my brother's brand new sedan hiccuped a notification on the family chat, shared location pinged by the roadside assistance app Luke had bragged about, flagging a halt on the shoulder of the bypass and a tire icon blinking like Morse code for, "Come fix it, I am helpless," which is how my mother's face went from indignation to nausea in one long blink, and how my father's voice dropped to that low register he saves for disasters, and how I, who had just required the truth to be written down in plain letters, felt the tiny thrill of revenge slide neatly into place as I said we could finish signing after we deal with whatever roadside masterpiece Luke had just created, because the insurance portal had changed from a favor to a mirror, and the night had decided that the people who forgot my birthday would now have to remember how to change a tire like competent adults or call their account holder and ask, with actual humility, for help they would have to earn. We reached the shoulder of the bypass with our hazard lights snapping against the dark like a metronome for bad decisions, and there, under the dull halo of a flickering street lamp, Luke stood beside his dazzling sedan with his hands buried in his pockets and a look on his face that could have passed for embarrassment if it were not padded with the familiar certainty that someone else would soon convert this inconvenience into a story about his charm. Yet tonight the stagehands had become an audience, because I did not rush forward with solutions or apologies or a credit card. I simply opened my trunk with the slow practicality of a person who owns a tire iron and knows where it lives, then set a compact jack, a pair of work gloves, a folded reflective triangle, and a clipboard on the gravel like the beginning of a lesson everyone should have learned before high school graduation, but somehow missed because cake and bows make convenient substitutes for confidence. My father attempted to salvage the scene with that easy authority he borrows whenever there is a task he thinks can be solved by voice tone alone, telling Luke to step aside and telling me to just make the call, by which he meant the call to my roadside assistance plan or, failing that, to the insurance portal that I had just put on an honest footing and therefore could not be used as a magic carpet anymore. So I handed the gloves to Luke, pointed to the owner's manual peeking out like a forgotten bookmark in his glove box, and said that tonight's syllabus involved identifying the jacking points, loosening lug nuts before the car left the ground, and discovering whether his trunk contained an actual spare or a decorative donut that would sag like overcooked flan, because while I am not above helping in a crisis, I am done auditioning for the role of family Sherpa with a smile as my only payment. And if this was going to be a rescue, it would be one that left calluses and signatures behind. It took less than a minute to learn that Luke had opted for a premium sound package that consumed the space where a sensible spare would have been, a choice that made my mother clutch her chest with the theatrics of a matinee while my father muttered something about modern cars, as if vehicle design itself had conspired against his son, and because the app he bragged about could not dispatch a truck without verified policy data that no longer auto-filled from my account like a river feeding a thirsty field, he looked at me with that puzzled, slightly affronted expression that men wear when the vending machine refuses their crumpled bill, and I nodded toward the clipboard where a single sheet, still warm from my printer, waited with lines for 3 signatures and a date, and I said that before any truck is called or any card is offered or any adult child is whisked home like a pasha, we would all put in writing the small human promises we had discussed at my kitchen table, not because I enjoy paperwork under sodium lamps, but because the only time anyone writes something down in this family is when they want someone else to carry it, and today that someone else went on strike. My mother whispered that this was cruel. My father said this was not the time. Luke laughed and said I was making a scene in the middle of traffic, which, to be fair, was not entirely false. Although the real show had been running for years in living rooms and driveways without a ticket price, so I set the reflective triangle a sensible distance behind us, opened the group chat, and toggled the live location with a simple caption that did not accuse or insult, but did document the truth pulled over, changing roles tonight, after which the comments began rolling in from relatives and neighbors who suddenly seemed more interested in safety than spectacle, which helped, because the moment you shine a little light on a pattern, people either offer to hold the flashlight or avert their gaze and hurry by, and I was more than ready to keep receipts on who did which. The tow company I called was the unfussy local outfit that accepts card numbers over the phone and shows up with a driver who has a sense of humor about humans, though not about liability. And while we waited, I walked Luke through the ritual he should have known by now, the slow crack of lug nuts, the steady turn of the jack, the long exhale that says you are not going to die just because a tire is made of rubber, and humiliation. Then I tapped open my credit alerts, because something in the finance office voicemail had itched behind my eyes all evening, and right there in the blue glow, while my brother crouched like a reluctant pilgrim by a wheel and my parents argued in whispers about whether my aunt would tell the whole county, a fresh notification bloomed with the neutral menace of a hospital monitor. A new auto inquiry under my full name from a lender I recognized from cheerful commercials, time-stamped with the exact minute my mother had asked me to bring cupcakes to dinner, if I had time, and even though I had prepared myself for some paperwork sloppiness, the sight of my identity being driven like a rental car on a celebratory errand punched a clean hole in the air that I did not bother to patch with politeness. The truck's lights came arcing over the rise just as I held up the clipboard again, and this time my father swallowed and reached for the pen with the careful movements of a man defusing a small device. My mother signed like she was crossing herself, and Luke scrawled the kind of signature that tells you a person has never had to live with the consequences of his hand, which is why I took a quiet private joy in placing the page back on the board and tucking it into my bag with the same Satisfaction a park ranger must feel when a ranger log records, in plain ink, that the rules are not just decorations nailed to a post. Then I gave the driver the policy number with the corrected address, authorized the tow to their driveway, and used my card for the call with a note that invoices should be routed to the named policy holder going forward. A series of actions as small and tidy as straightened silverware, yet potent enough to reset a table that had been slanted in one direction. For too long. While the car was being winched and the men exchanged the universal small talk of straps and weather, I walked to the edge of the shoulder where the weeds turned back into trimmed grass. And I called the lender number with the kind of focus I usually save for opening jars no one else can open, asked for the fraud department, and, in the patient cadence of someone who understands the power of nouns and dates, requested a freeze on any application bearing my name that was not initiated from my address, then repeated my request when the representative tried to warm me with phrases about convenience and family, and only when the freeze was confirmed and a letter promised did I return to the cluster of my people and say, with a softness that surprised me because it felt less like vengeance and more like hygiene, that the next step after parking this shining toy at their curb would be very simple. We would bake a cake together on Sunday that did not collapse. We would sit at my table and mark the calendar squares for the coming year like civilized citizens, and we would correct every account that had floated under my name without my consent, because my silence had never been emptiness. It had been a locked room with the lights off. And tonight I had flipped the switch, which is why my brother, squinting into the tow truck's taillights as it pulled away, asked whether the lender would still call him tomorrow, and my father looked at me with the dawning comprehension of a man who has just felt the ground under his feet till to degree, and my mother reached for my arm with the careful touch of someone approaching a wild animal that has finally lost its interest in performing tricks, and while I let her hand land and stay, my phone buzzed in my pocket with a new voicemail from the dealership that began with a cheerful reminder about final signatures for the title package, then trailed into a request to confirm the co-applicant details, at which point the night air felt very still and the maples hissed like quiet witnesses, and I realized that the bow on that hood might have been tied tighter around me than any of them intended, which meant the last thing I would be offering this family before Sunday's dinner was not dessert, but a pen. Sunday arrived with the kind of weather that makes every imperfect surface look intentional, a soft overcast that flatters lawns and hides scratches on cars, and while a pan of yellow cake cooled on my counter with a dignity no store-bought tray ever manages, I pulled the printed lender letter from its envelope, laid out the dealership voicemail transcript I had requested for my records, and set next to them the one-page agreement my parents had signed on the shoulder of the bypass, because if we were going to pretend that this was a normal family dinner with coffee and plates and the newspaper folded to the crossword, then I would at least build a place setting for the truth. And when the doorbell rang and my mother stepped in with a bouquet that still wore the plastic sleeve and my father followed carrying a tin of coffee, like a peace offering from an older time, I pointed them to the table and did not mention how the color of the flowers almost matched the bow that had become the symbol of a week I would remember for the rest of my life. Luke arrived last, treading in on a gust of cologne and bravado that evaporated when he saw the paper stack and the grown look on my face, the one he never enjoys because it means the room has rules. And he started with a joke about how he had survived his own tire change with a bruise and a new appreciation for mechanical things, a joke that could have worked if we were not already living in the part of the story where the punchlines had turned into signatures. So I cut him off with a wave. That felt less like rudeness and more like triage, and I asked him to sit down and listen without interruption, because the week had clarified something that could have stayed murky for years. And I wanted to see whether anyone at this table could handle clarity without reaching for a paper bag of excuses. I said, slowly enough that no one could later claim I had rushed them, that I knew exactly how my email had become the address of record, that I had a freeze on any applications connected to my name from the dealership's lender, that I had logs showing the originating IP address for the credit pull matched the kitchen router at my parents' house, and that I could, with a single phone call, escalate this to a report that would live in a file cabinet with my father's exact signature printed on a form the color of winter, and I watched them absorb the shape of that possibility the way people look at a bruise on their own skin and only remember later how the corner of the table found them. And then I told them that I was not here to humiliate anyone. I was here to draw a line that had been missing since my first broken promise to myself, which had taken place at an age when girls are still complimented for being helpful and boys are praised for being busy. My father tried to explain the co-applicant entry as a clerical convenience. My mother called it a misunderstanding that the dealer had encouraged with quick talk and cheerful pens, and Luke, finally dropping the grin, said he thought it would be faster. That he had just clicked through, that the whole world is a form and he cannot be expected to read every box, and I let their words dry on the table like spilled coffee while I cut the cake into squares with careful strokes, set 3 pieces in front of them without ceremony, and placed the last on my own plate as if the act of cutting and serving could stitch together the loose edges of the afternoon. Then I opened my notebook to the page where I had written a plan that would look, to an outsider, both petty and fair, and I asked whether they preferred the route of public honesty or the route of private repair, both of which would end the same way, with my name removed from anything that did not belong to me and my calendar. Respected like a contract, but one of which would be a lesson sung by cousins at barbecues for years, and the other of which would be a very quiet memory that only we held. The private repair, I said, involves 3 steps that any adult who can drive a vehicle and choose a bouquet can complete without injury. First, we will call the lender together on speaker and remove my name and email entirely from the auto account, with no redirections or placeholders that mysteriously return later like weeds. Second, we will contact the dealership and require a corrected title package bearing only Luke's name as the owner and my father or mother as guarantor if they so desire, with me nowhere in the small print even as a ghost. Third, we will set up a series of calendar reminders for the next 12 months that include not only my birthday but also the ordinary check-ins that prevent families from becoming bureaucracies with shared DNA, such as dinners that are not last-minute summonses, calls that are not emergencies disguised as love, and yes, the small ceremony of a card purchased on time, written with a human hand. The public honesty route, I continued while their forks paused above their plates like weather vanes that cannot decide which way the wind blows, would be simpler and slower and far more educational, consisting of a fraud report that would force a compliant dealership to explain why their cheerful pens wander into names that do not belong on contracts, an affidavit that would require my father to admit a kind of laziness he prefers to call tradition, and, because my aunt is a storm all by herself, a family conversation that would cure any future amnesia at the cost of a few picnic invitations, and I could live with that cost if the lesson took, though I would rather bake cake and move on with my life, because revenge for me has never been fire. It has been paperwork and boundaries, clean and boring and deadly effective. They chose private repair, of course they did, and we made the calls with the patient brutality that bureaucracy demands, holding for music that sounded like it had been composed to sound like mercy and correcting names 1 syllable at a time until the representative read back a version of our story that would not haunt my credit report or my sleep. And when it was done, my mother cried the kind of crying that does not need tissues because it is more relief than grief. My father said he was proud I had handled it like a professional, in a tone that admitted he had finally met my competence as a boundary rather than a service. And Luke promised a repayment plan with such solemnity that I almost believed him until I remembered every Tuesday he had said he would clean the gutters and did not. When they left, the house settled into the soft clatter of plates in the sink and the low buzz of the refrigerator doing its quiet job while no one thanked it. And I stood in the doorway with my hand on the frame and listened to the car doors closing and the careful way my father reversed down the driveway. And I felt that familiar tug behind my ribs that says forgiveness is easier than standards and love is easier than loneliness. Yet I also felt the steadier tug that says a line drawn once can be stepped over 1,000 times if you pretend it was never there, and I did not want to live like a hallway. So I cleared the table, folded the signed agreement into a file, and slid it next to my passport where I keep proof of my own existence. The following morning, the group chat pinged with a photo of Luke washing the sedan with a guilty flourish under their maple, a caption about earning it the old-fashioned way, and a note from my father suggesting dinner next month for my official birthday makeup. And I typed and deleted 3 replies before settling on none, because sometimes the most generous answer is to let people attempt kindness without grading it, and I was almost ready to move on when my phone vibrated with a message from the dealership's manager. A polite confirmation that the corrected title package would be overnight for signatures and a gentle request to verify the co-applicant field had been cleared, which is how I learned, more by implication than statement, that a thin thread still connected me to that gleaming symbol parked under their tree, and I stood there with the phone in my hand and stared at the cake pan and the papers and the quiet living room, and I considered, for a very long breath, whether the smartest revenge at this point would be to drive over with a pen and witness their signatures out of self-preservation, or to let the thread tighten until someone else felt the tug I had carried for years. And the truth is I do not know which choice I made until you check the title in a few months and see whether my name is nowhere or hiding like a watermark. But I do know that when my birthday rolls around next year, the calendar will sing without me lifting a finger. The door will open only if the knock is gentle, and the quiet that follows will be the kind I chose, not the kind I swallowed.